Welcome to the Psychedelic Mindscape, a podcast that delves into two fascinating topics, psychedelics and leadership. I'm your host, Victoria Lauren, and today I'm speaking with the founder of INTEGRA, Amánda Efthimiou. Amánda explores how consciousness can transform from self to society. As a mental health advocate and facilitator, she architects experiences that empowers people to connect to themselves, to others, and to the natural world. Her approach uniquely bridges traditional knowledge systems with scientific insights. She's informed both by her MS in neuroscience, where she focused on the therapeutic potential of psychedelic medicines, and her nonprofit sector experience supporting indigenous ecosystems regeneration and bioculture preservation in the Amazon basin. Amánda's experience is sought after among organizations driving the future in the health and wellness, environmental science, technology, and design sectors. Through her company INTEGRA, she facilitates interdisciplinary workshops worldwide, creating spaces for conscious leaders and innovators to transform their inner states towards outer regenerative impact. Welcome, Amánda. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's really a pleasure.
I'm so happy that we get the opportunity to speak today. So, just for background with the audience, I actually got to meet you in person in New York. This was back in December. You were giving a talk at the Psychedelic Assembly, and I was only there for a short trip, business trip, but had an evening free, saw that you were speaking, and I'm so grateful that I went to your talk because I really took a lot away from it. So thank you for doing
Oh,
that.
yes, and it's great to now just be here talking with you in the virtual space for your audience.
Yeah. Wonderful. So you had given a talk and dive very deeply in all of your work into this process of integration, and so I just wanted to ask you. I feel like this is a popular topic, but what is integration, and what is that whole process of integration after a psychedelic experience, as you see it?
Thank you for the question. This, as we know, we're talking about psychedelics, which are now coming to the forefront of the psyche and the human experience. And integration is now starting to be spoken about. However, I feel it's a topic that's quite misunderstood still. Integration, as I like to call it, is really a synthesis of insights and peak experiences that come from an altered state into our daily life and how we translate those insights into a meaningful outcome for us. So, integration can be this translation of what happened during an altered state into our everyday reality and also the new habits and changes that we're making as a result from it. Now, integration historically could be really focused on a more cognitive process. So, in the clinical trials that we see with psychedelic therapies, the concept of integration is really limited to perhaps cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or just general psychological support that happens immediately after an experience. Talking therapy, essentially. And that's very, very valuable and very necessary for people. However, I see integration as a much longer process, one that actually is different from one person to another, and that is more holistic and integrative in nature, that incorporates the emotional body, the physical body, of course, the cognitive space, and also potentially for some people, a more transpersonal connection with an experience and how we integrate that from maybe more of a spiritual point of view, if that's in somebody's worldview and capacity. So integration really looks like different things for different people. It can be, again, more of a talking-based therapy. It can be a solo experience. So there's also a lot to be said around integrating in the presence of others, which we can talk about in terms of group versus individual. It can be more of a somatic experience. So some people might feel that they've experienced something so profound, but there's no way to put words to it. And so they're actually wanting to translate that through their body, the vessel of their body, and how that can be manifested in different places in their body. And it needs to be released from their body. For some, it's more of an artistic practice. They may not be somebody who wants to go and journal and write about their experience, but they want to paint what they felt and how they're feeling now, and that helps them make sense of it. But essentially, integration is really also to bring in um, the neuroscience there. Integration is this window of opportunity that happens after a peak moment where our brains are in this neuroplastic state, and we're much more likely to take advantage of these newfound moments of insight and changes that we want to make, and actually to act on them. So we're more likely to make those changes right after this peak experience. So actually, integration, in my view, is a necessity. It's absolutely necessary, and it should be part of somebody's whole understanding of what it means to be in an altered state. In the same way, we look at, let's talk about the preparation, the changes we want to make before, all the research we do about how we have an experience, with what type of facilitator, with what type of substance. All of that care and dedication is also required into our own integration process. And so for me, it just feels like all one and the same part of somebody's transformational journey, if you'd like to call it that.
I love that. Thank you for that description. The one thing that really struck me in just in the talk that you gave in New York, you would ask the audience that exact question of what is integration, and like, what does your integration practice look like? And what really struck me was the number of things that people listed that were much more about being in their bodies, or being in that creative, expressive flow state, or being in nature, whether that was solo or with community. And I didn't think about it until you drew our attention to the fact that no one even mentioned talk therapy until maybe like 25 things down the list. Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Like, that is a modality, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I love therapy. And I see a lot of benefit, for myself personally, and others, of talk therapy. But expanding that idea, because for example, in Oregon, where I am, we have just in Bend, it's a small town, maybe 100,000 people, and we have 4 different integration circles that meet on a weekly basis, focused on psychedelic integration. And they're all talk therapy focused. And so it's just made me feel really curious about, well, what could other integration circles look like? And if you're in that, kind of retreat setting, perhaps not just having the sharing circle itself, but incorporating maybe some of the somatics. And kind of what I'm hearing you say, Amánda, is that people that have, let's say that they have an established creative practice, like their preferred method of creative expression, perhaps leaning into that is what integration is for them. Or perhaps it's, trying something new. I don't know if that resonates, or if
Mm.
that lands with you.
Yeah, for how I like to share, I myself do integration coaching for individuals and for groups. So a lot of what I do is education and training for professionals, but also one-on-one. It's important that I still connect with individuals on a daily basis. And what I like to say is, really, it's not about reinventing the wheel or starting to create a whole new practice that's completely foreign. For many people, having had that altered state experience, both substance and non substance induced, is already very new. It's something completely out of somebody's way of being on a day-to-day basis, right? And so when we integrate, we want to come back to ourselves. We want to come back home to our bodies, to our own state, and then explore within the safety and comfort of our home that we live in, that we embody, an integration process. And for some, that can be home and comfort and safety is dancing, moving our bodies. For others, that is not what they are comfortable doing. They would actually rather sit and have a conversation with somebody or come to me as a coach and just kind of come back and forth and explore or see a therapist. There is, so when you say, the creative process can be very very useful for people who are already in that creative state. That's not to say that we don't encourage people to try new things, of course. And this is actually the ripe time for people to explore something that perhaps they felt hesitant to before. And so a lot of people that I work with, they've seen people kind of draw or paint and they're like, "Oh, I've never done that." Or, "I used to do that as a kid and actually I was shut down because I was told as a kid that I wasn't good at drawing. And so I stopped doing it my whole life." This can be an interesting time after you have a peak experience. And maybe during that experience, you're actually resolving a lot of these childhood experiences and traumas, that you come back to a drawing practice to reignite what was lost in you. That, for example, is a great way to connect a past process with the current one. And maybe that can become something that's really part of your day to day. So there's a
I
lot of ways
love
to think
that.
about integration.
Yeah. You don't know this, but you hit very close to home. I am exactly that person that used to love drawing as a kid and was told early on that that I didn't do it the right way. You know, I have like this very
Mm.
clear memory of elementary school being told, well, I was drawing a like a nature scene with a moose, and I was told that, well, you can't have a purple moose. And after that, like, I just, I wasn't interested in doing it. And going into some of the ceremonies that I've had, it's like setting an intention around the integration piece being this opportunity to sort of get reacquainted with these practices that, perhaps used to be fun for me at one time, but for whatever reason, I feel like a hesitation or like there's a barrier to being able to engage with that. And so for me, it might be something simple like, well, like I have a meditation practice and I want to recommit to it, right? And kind of like
Mhm.
find the joy in the meditation practice again. Whereas like with drawing, it was more about overcoming the negative self-talk and the judgment that I would bring to it. And now I love drawing and I do it all the time and I'm terrible at it. Like no one would ever buy my artwork, but that's okay. Like that's not why I do it. I'd love to know, like, for you, because obviously you are a very creative person as well. Like, what does your integration process look like? Or are there things that you like to lean into more so than others?
Yeah, my integration process varies according to my where I'm at in my life. I think it's evolved and it changes. It goes back to some areas and because it revisits um, different modalities. I'm very much a physical person. I love to move my body and to dance, and so finding spaces where I feel safe enough, whether alone or in a contained setting, whether it be an ecstatic dance or something like this, where I can actually really release a lot through my body. That is something that I find to be the most helpful if I can get myself to that place. And nature, for me, being in connection with nature, swimming in a river, earthing, which connects connecting my body to the ground and just putting my feet on the ground or my belly to the ground for 20 minutes at a time. That is an integration for me because it's really about grounding back. A lot of these experiences, and I also when I talk about an altered state, I really speak to all forms of altered states of consciousness. When we talk about psychedelics, we immediately go to the substance induced experiences that people might have. But there's so much to be said for having a breathwork journey or a deeply meditative experience that can be profoundly life changing, or any kind of retreat or immersion in nature, for example, and being outside of our everyday reality, we can reach these states and be completely thrown off track when we come back home because we just experienced something so great. And now what do we do with that? And
Mm-hmm.
so there is an expansion also of what I mean by an altered state. Um, I mean, even giving birth, my co-founder of the training program Reciprocal, where we teach integration, she just gave birth. That's an altered state of consciousness experience. How, the integration of that is very different than a person who's having their own, breathwork journey on a weekend, right? So there's so much there. And to go back to your question, being in nature, moving my body, I also am very much a writer. I write all the time, and I generally write in according to different cycles of my personal body, but also in the seasons. So there's a different type of writing that I do depending on if we're in a winter or spring, summer. It's I try to connect a lot with the seasons in informing how I integrate any kind of experience. Um,
Mm. That's a beautiful way to just, yeah, keep that connection with nature when you're paying attention to the changes in season and changes within, the cycles of your own body. So I love that you bring all of that together. That to me feels like, yeah, part of that grounding practice that you talked about.
yeah,
Yeah. So I've already, introduced you with the bio, but I didn't actually ask you how you came to this work and to, feeling inspired to work this way with people around integration. So I'd love to just give you the opportunity to share kind of your background and like where you're coming from. Where's that personal drive?
absolutely. Very much so a personal drive. I am somebody who's always been a seeker and looking to find ways of helping myself and my inner world, my mental state. I was somebody who had suffered from depression and anxiety for a number of years as a teenager, and I was trying all kinds of um, different pharmaceutical drugs to support me in that process, and nothing was really working for me at a time. So I was looking for something more and something greater, and I met people who were doing things differently. They were practicing yoga, for example, nothing I'd even considered for many, many years growing up. Who were meditating, who were dancing. They introduced me to ecstatic dance. This was like, for the first time, I figured out there's other ways of expressing what was really bottled up inside of me. And that was when I was introduced to plant based medicines. And that really supported my healing process. It opened the door to a new way of looking at myself. And I will also say this I express this while also adding a caveat that I don't condone any use of illegal substances or self experimentation with substances that are not in legal jurisdictions. So this is something that I share because where I was and the context in which I was doing so was completely within my legal rights and limits. And I know that we're talking a lot about psychedelics, but it's very much not legal in most parts of the world. So um, I do say that also. This is purely for educational and harm reduction purposes, this conversation. And so when I was opened up to these new ways of sort of experimenting, I realized that my whole life since that point, these 8, 9 years go by, and I'm integrating that first peak moment where I said, okay, I'm actually going to start to support myself without pharmaceutical medications. I can do my own thing. I can experiment with meditation practices. I can look within, really deepen that self-inquiry. I can use my body to release whatever needs to be released. And so I was deepening these practices, and I was very curious about what the science has to say around these psychoactive drugs and other modalities, mindfulness, meditation, etc., and how they've helped people like me. And so I did a neuroscience degree focusing on the effects specifically of psilocybin, which is found in magic mushrooms, together with psychotherapy for depression outcomes. So I was looking at the research, what exactly is happening, what was the state of research at the time when I did this, um, who is looking at this from a therapeutic and clinical lens, because that's also where I wanted to move into, is really having a say in how these are done from a therapeutic perspective beyond any kind of recreational use. And it was after the time when I finished my degree that I've started to consult with a company that was making investments into psychedelic therapies, and that was really supporting the safe, accessible, and regulated use of these substances in North and South North America. And working with this company, I said, wow, there's so much investment being made into the clinical trials for these psychedelic drugs, into the tech infrastructure to support therapists, to support their patients. But there's no one really talking about how we can integrate and what it looks like to actually make sense of the after part of the journey. Everyone's focused on delivery. What is actually, let's get these, kind of this medicalized model of like, let's replace one drug with another and help people that way. I was more interested in not those substances at all, but actually what we're doing with them, what we're doing about that experience and making it impactful for ourselves, but also for others in a more collective sense. So that's when I started Integra, to really design for this, for individuals, for groups, for retreat centers, for organizations that actually want to make sense of this without involving in psychedelics because they're not legal. But what are the insights that we can be inspired by reaching a peak state experience and optimize our own way of working, our own purpose,
Mhm.
finding our dharma and like moving in that direction. And so that's how I got into Integra. All the while I was also working with a nonprofit that does today, although I'm not with them anymore, bioculture preservation of indigenous owned lands in the Amazon basin in Brazil. And many of these communities also work with sacred plant medicines. And so I was able to learn by observing how they work with the world of nature and with their own natural medicines that are inherently part of their life and culture, how they integrate that into their life. And for them, integration is a very different concept. It actually doesn't even exist because it's part of their life. They're integrated into the world in a very different way than we are. But there's so much that we can learn from that. And so I work with those learnings also in my own practice and how I teach others about integration.
Mm. That's really interesting. And I'm wondering if, how in North America, it's a very individualized sort of society and approach. And when I, hear of people journeying with psilocybin and like the licensed service centers that we have here in Oregon, for example, it's all in this one-on-one setting, and the integration process afterwards, assuming that they continue perhaps with, a therapist that has been trained in that. Again, it's more of that one-on-one setting. So I'm curious, for the groups that you've worked with in the Amazon basin, is there really much of that like one-on-one, or do you see it as being a much more collective process? How does that look for them?
Yeah, so for the specifically some of the communities that I've visited and gotten to know over the years, I see that it's absolutely not an individual process. These cultures live and exist and connect and learn and grow in community. Everything is done in tribe, and the community is very much family, whether it's
Mhm.
from the grandmother down to the grandchild and everyone in between. And these experiences are done from my, again, I'm just giving you my perspective of what I see. I don't place any kind of put words into anybody's experience who are actually from these cultures. But as my observation, I see that many of these cultures are working with these medicines, both psychoactive and non psychoactive plant medicines, uh, as just one of the parts of how they're in service to Earth and how they're honoring the cycles of nature and how they're honoring their ancestors and the rituals and just their very fabric of their culture is embedded with these plants because we are nature, we are from nature, and so these plants are part of us. And it's all done in community and ritual and circle. There is no individual healing, let's call it. Our healing is collective because we are all one another. We're all connected to one another. So our healing is somebody else's healing. Our transformation is theirs. And so the way we even, there is no concept of this individual work. It's a very different way of being. And therefore, the integration is also, there is just going back to your home in nature, in the forest. There is just returning back to a conversation you had with the person in your family who you just had a ceremonial experience with. There's no separation. You're not going away from somewhere. You're staying in the same place. You're staying with the same people. They all know exactly what you went through because they were part of that journey with you. And so the power of community is so strong with these cultures, and it's something that we don't have as much access to in the global north because of our individual society, because of the nature of the structure of how legal therapeutic use of psychedelics work. It's still very one-on-one because it's still for an individual's indication with a mental health issue, and so they're dealing with it by themselves. But there's so much to be done with group work, and so group integration is a really nice bridge for people, I believe, from that individual work to back in society kind of
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. I think, one of the hesitations that I hear from people that I work with in my coaching practice is like this fear of being vulnerable in front of other people. There's like this sense of, oh, what if I start crying? Or, what if I'm sobbing uncontrollably? Or maybe I like make a funny sound, or I scream, or I like move in a weird way. And it's like so much fear of judgment or rejection from community and the people around you. And what I always share is that there's a group therapy that I go to on a weekly basis. And the power that I've experienced, this is a non-psychedelic group. This is more, focused on talk therapy and trauma integration work. But the healing that I've experienced being witnessed in a circle, in a community of other people who are not trying to comfort you or change your experience, but just see you and accept you as you are in that moment. It's so powerful. Like I'm able to tap into much scarier places and I think deeper grief when I'm in that setting compared to when I'm in like a one-on-one individual therapy session. So I very strongly believe, in the powerful healing of the collective. And I'm curious to know, since you and I both have this approach that weaves like the science and the sacred. My background's biomedical engineering. I worked in med tech and healthcare for many years, and I'm like very familiar with that framework. But I also feel very drawn to more of the traditional ceremonial spaces, and I kind of feel like there's something that each can teach the other. And so, like, when you think about, let's say, psychedelic assisted therapy, and I mean, we're anticipating the future legalization of MDMA, for example, for the application with people that are struggling with PTSD. When you look at that medical model versus what you're seeing with these, indigenous groups, I guess, do you have a desired path? Like, what would you like to see happen in North America in particular? As we get more of these medicines coming available, what do you think would be the right way, or what do you hope to see happen?
It's a great question. It's around bridging. So, what does a real bridge look like? And when I say bridge, I want to make sure that what I would like to see happen is in all ways non-extractive in nature, and that is not appropriative of any practices that happen within a culture and translated into a clinical context, there is a bridge that can be made that is inspired by, but that does not directly attribute something that is inherently of a cultural of one's culture, right? I do see so much value in in community work. And so the whether or not these experiences are done legally in a group, which can be very interesting, especially for people who are working through post-traumatic stress disorder and MDMA. What would that look like? A legal group setting of a number of people who are going through something collectively and having a facilitator who can handle that. That would be very powerful, as you said, being witnessed in an experience and then being witnessed after the experience in the integration, and having that same group really be followed on over the course of several months to a year, all connecting at the same time in the same type of way, either virtually or in person. That builds so much accountability for one another, because the facilitator or the clinician is not the person healing you. You are doing it, and you are receiving a lot of that inspiration and strength from the other people who are in the same place as you, who are also on that path. And so that can be something we can learn from and do more with, I believe, and it can be done effectively. It requires a lot more navigation of how to facilitate that, but that is one way. And then there's some other ways that if it's not translated directly into group settings, what are different practices that are related to what Indigenous wisdom can share with us that we can do in our day to day? For example, in many First Nations and originary cultures, there's a strong emphasis on our ancestors, on where we come from. And so, who are our parents, who are our grandparents, our great grandparents? What is the land, our ancestral land? What land do we actually come from? And how are ways that we can bring that into our own healing? A lot of the work that people do is actually very much intergenerational um, traumas and reflections. And so bringing our ancestors in with us is something that we don't normally do in sort of our society. We're not constantly being asked to connect back with the people in our life, both living and non-living at this time. So what are ways that we can start to bring that into an integration and use that as fuel for our own process? Similarly, another way we can practice is connecting with the natural elements that are sustaining us in our day to day. This isn't even something, witchy or woo woo. This is actually like literal water that we drink every day that gives us life, that helps us clean our hands and our food and where we wash. And water is essential to live. And First Nations peoples, many of them have a lot of emphasis on connecting with the elements that give us life, like water. And so, what are ways every day when we wake up that we actually have gratitude to the water we drink? Just showing small acts of appreciation for what is in our environment is naturally creating this ripple effect on how we treat our environment and nature. And so this is something I think we can bridge very, very much, very easily right away. The way we interact with nature is the way we interact with ourselves and with others. Everything is connected. And so I feel that the group integration or the individual integration, even in clinical settings, it's about educating people to work with these processes. There is, I think, a way to weave these two together. And of course, if we need to work in only measured and tracked methods with science, and research, I would call for more research on how people's connection to the natural elements would therefore make them more inclined to treat their environment better. There is actually a recent study about nature relatedness and ayahuasca, for example, a study that was done that saw that people who were working with that medicine had more capacities to be more connected with nature. And so more studies like this need to happen so that we can make those connections more easily and teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that vision. And I'm wondering, like, to take it, from the individual healing perspective and expanding that out to, just as you were talking about the connection between ourselves, others, and nature. And, I see part of the beauty of an altered state of consciousness, or that type of peak experience, is that you have that understanding not just in the mind but in the body. It's like you feel the connection. There's no question, right? You're like, yes, I am part of nature, nature's part of me. Like, there is no separation. So when you shift that and think about like the business innovators that you're working with, and you had talked about this transformation from their inner states towards the outer regenerative impact. I'd love to know more about, like, what do you mean by regenerative impact, and what are some of those shifts that you're seeing in, we'll say, the consciousness of business development in relation to this integration process.
Absolutely. So what I see is individuals who are highly successful, high-powered individuals who have positions of being able to make great change, who are, in whatever way they have a legal experience, often in the Netherlands, for example, where, because I'm mostly based in Europe, I see people who do a legal psychedelic experience in the Netherlands with truffles. They come out of this and they're just seeking for ways to connect what they experience for themselves and actually apply that into how they lead and how they actually make the decisions that they're making that affect hundreds, thousands of people. And so this is really interesting because once the connection has started and people start to see that what they can individually do will actually have ripple effects on the world, especially if they're already running a business or an organization or have a say in certain policies that are affecting nature. And once they feel that connection with nature, or they feel that they want to support others in a deeper way than they have, given also that sort of neuroplastic state, they're much more inclined to do something about it. And so this impact is just acknowledging that there is a change that can be made that is for good. And now it's a responsibility. So I talk a lot about responsibility. When we truly integrate, we're assuming a responsibility that we now have. And that responsibility goes beyond our individual one. And so I often think that the reason why there's this whole resurgence of psychedelics as a conversation now, and especially in our world that's just completely going through so much change, and even turns in from a climate perspective, we are seeing very much on our day-to-day basis the result of climate change in our daily life. These are around now to awaken us to new possibilities of how we can be back in service to the earth that we are part of. And so it's more of a philosophical understanding, but it hits people differently when they've experienced it, when you say they're embodying it and they're feeling it. So once they feel it, they're ready for it, and they're committed to it. And so I'm starting to see more commitment and responsibility, and more care and more compassion and more understanding of people, let's say in a business setting, who have multiple employees who are going through very different struggles. There's a more human-centered approach now being happening in the workplace. Even it's not about bringing psychedelics to work, it's about working with your inner state and then it actually creating those effects. And I'm starting to slowly see it, and I'm trying to be part of this movement towards that. Once people really understand it, again, because sometimes it's hard to explain without having experienced that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, that was really what inspired the shift into doing the psychedelic leadership coaching. Because I felt that same type of extractive mentality that we can see at the corporate level of our environment. You can also see that of our people. And just like with the rates of burnout, and people being so focused on, I have to be productive and I have to demonstrate results and I have to prove myself. It's that same kind of extractive energy. And, working in the corporate world as long as I did, I saw a lot of that. And I saw it across multiple industries, whether it was literally, I used to work in oil and gas, which is literally extractive. I saw it there, but also companies that, have this mission of, oh, we're saving people's lives and we're doing good for the world, but then mistreating employees. And I just felt like, the more that business leaders can learn from this type of experience and integrate it into the way that they are running their business, the way that they're treating their people. And as you said, that ripple effect. I feel excited about it because I'm like, yeah, we can literally change the world. And that's a wonderful feeling to have, like that belief that, yes, this will become this outsized impact. So,
I
yes,
love
thank
that.
you
Yes,
for all
we're on
that
the
you
same
shared.
page.
We are. We
Yeah.
absolutely are. Well, I know that you're calling in today from New York and you've just left Brazil after several months. You've been traveling a lot. What are you excited about for, like what's next?
Hmm. I'm really excited to keep this thread of training and educating professionals to become integration psychedelic literate, so to speak, to give them the tools to support their clients, whether they're therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, massage therapists, people who are in service of supporting another's journey. I do that training through Reciproco, which is a company that I have. We do online training, self paced course, cohort based. We have retreats. So, expanding that, continuing to develop that is really exciting for me this year. And oh gosh, just finding new avenues of exploring this language of integration beyond a psychedelic context. I do feel that the more we can start thinking about this inner work and self-inquiry that translates to outer impact, and regardless of the modality that we're doing it, that's really exciting for me. And building experiences for altered states journeys that are non-substance induced, whether it be a retreat, a gathering of professionals and workplace style, and having a lot of sharing and even these breathwork modalities, meditation practices, doing something in a container and then integrating that container thereafter. I'm
Mm.
fascinated in how we can start doing that with nature based practices that are non psychedelic. So that's what I'm looking at this year.
That sounds like a busy year. So you've got options for folks to do one-on-one coaching. You also consult with organizations, with retreat centers. You've got the integration training that's going on. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you? If you have a website or social media, where can people find you?
Yeah, the best way would be my website, amandaefthimiou.com. There's a contact page there. I read everything that comes through that website form. My Instagram, I can send you that if you want to add that. You can reach me on Instagram, my LinkedIn page as well. Any way that you see me online, I am findable. Certainly, that's the best way.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put all those links in then for people to reach out. Thank you so much for taking the time, Amanda. This has just been an incredible conversation. I wish we had more time together, but I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and it'll be exciting to see what you build and where you go.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for the opportunity. I'll speak to you
Very
soon.
welcome. Take care.